So with these rates, the researchers started to look into what's going on. And I'll break it down into three basic ideas that cover everything, so you can we'll start from that. That's pretty easy to understand. When you're asleep, or when you're like laying down and doing absolutely nothing, that is about the lowest heart rate you're gonna have. So I won't erase it just yet. You are gonna have here, I'm gonna draw this. This is, we'll call this heart rate, right? There is a lower floor that you have as a person. And that lower floor, it could change a little bit, right? Especially, like I said, if let's say you haven't done anything in a while, and you decide you want to go running and you want to get back into it, or you want to get into cycling or the elliptical and you start getting back into it, that number might drop a little bit. But there's always like some sort of lower limit, right? You never hear about anyone having a 30 resting heart rate, because if you have a 30, you're on your way to coding and you're about to die. So this is one of those areas where less isn't always better. There's a lower limit. And once you get past that lower limit, you are probably having a really bad event. And I don't mean the bad event to be a joke. I do mean the joke part is, lower isn't always better. Conversely, higher is not always better. If your heart goes up really, really high, you are in cardiac arrest and you are about to die a different way. So there is also an upper limit up here for a person. You're going to be different than me. I'm going to be different from you. One of the earlier researchers who came around, he was looking at a lot of different ages of people, and in his data he saw a trend that roughly 220 minus the person's age is the maximum. He didn't say that was supposed to be the maximum. Some people kind of took that and ran with it too far. He had to kind of come back in at some point, I forget, it's like in the 2000s, and say, look, I think you're overusing my data to do something that's just not specific enough. It's not accurate enough. So one of the things I did, I'll put this in the notes, is the people I've worked with over time, 230 minus age is okay. Alternatively, I try and figure out this range first. So I'll have them check their lower level one, and then we'll do something that's fairly tough, and I'll put a little, I'll add a little fudge factor to it, because almost nobody gets to their actual max heart rate. That's right before the point where you would say pass out. And, once we have that range, we can do what we're going to want to do anyways, which is we're going to try and figure out what happens in the range. And it turns out from a lot of the research that was done is that you basically have three ranges. Now, pause for a second. If you have been told there's like zone 1 through 5, or sometimes I've even heard 7, they're all the same basic idea, right? Which is that somewhere about here, you have now 3 ranges where you can be, which is, let's say here. So this is zone 1. So technically I want you to think of the zone as including the line itself. This one here. That's a very narrow zone. So because there's different sizes, there's different numbers of these zones, some people break this one into 2, some people break this one also into 2, and that would give you the zone 5. But in reality, there's really kind of like 3 main areas: zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. I put that right around that spot right there, and then zone 3 is this spot right here. Zone 1 is this larger area here. And what the researchers found was your heart rate is reflective of how much energy you are using. So now we have a combination of what your heart is doing and what your metabolism is doing. Metabolism is affecting every other part of your body, and the two big areas of your body that matter for health, wellness, movement, sports performance, all those types of things are your skeletal muscle and your brain. And those use up a ton of energy that you have previously eaten and your body has stored either in what's called ATP, which is cash in your wallet. It's a molecule in your cells, every cell. It's designed to be used quickly for energy. Or it's stored as something called glycogen or glucose. You have glucose in your blood. That's why it tastes sweet and salty sometimes. Also, if you're like a diabetic, you'll know a lot about glucose. And or muscle glycogen, which is stored inside your cells, mostly muscle cells, but also sometimes in your liver as well. And that is a little bit more packaged form of glucose. So glucose, think of it as like your, it's not quite as like a check, if anyone still uses checks. If you don't use a check, it's like a money transfer, trying to transfer from your, your Venmo to your PayPal or to your bank. It takes a little bit longer to get used because your body has to essentially unwind the packaging, break it up into the smallest parts, and then it can use it. So it takes time to break it apart and use it, okay? And then there's also fat. Fat takes the longest time because it's really packaged up, which is why a little bit of fat on you has a tremendous amount of energy because your body has figured out over all this time, like how to efficiently, not just ours, like how to pack fat and store energy that takes longer to unwind, but you get way more energy in the same small size as you would for muscle glycogen or ATP. So it's very efficient in terms of space. It is very inefficient in terms of how long it takes to get the energy out of it. What that means is since it takes a long time to get the energy out of it, you can only use fat for things that are slow. Because if you do something fast, fat hasn't had time to break down yet. And then you have to use something else. So what they figured out was this, zone 1, is where you get to use fat. Mostly. And way up in here, where you're going, you're running towards this, sprinting for the finish line, or you're trying to get away from a bear, whatever it is, where your heart rate is really high for you, you don't have time to support how fast you're moving through fat. You have to use that ATP. So this is the ATP zone. And then in between is when you're also using carbohydrates, whether it's blood glucose, so the sugar that's actually in your blood getting transported around, or the areas of your body that have some glycogen inside the cells already. So you have some that's already stored, a little bit, and then your blood can get some through. So now, of course, if you're running and you need to get blood to your legs with that glucose, and you need to get oxygen there, and you need to get rid of some of the waste. Lactic acid is one of those things, but also just generally ions, hydrogen ions, which are going to raise your pH. You have to pump blood faster. And that's why your heart rate goes up. So the big understanding here from the research of these folks plus tons of others is that your heart rate is reflective of your metabolism, which is tied intimately to what you're doing. And so if you're, say, taking a nice walk outside, I'm in New York City, I'm on the east side right now. It is a terrible day to take a walk. It's about to thunderstorm in the summer. What is that nonsense? I could basically support my walking by burning a little bit of fat. And so if you've ever seen numbers on a treadmill, and it says like, oh, you used 200 calories today on this treadmill, that's probably mostly fat. You also use probably a little bit of that muscle glycogen and glucose in your bloodstream because you're probably somewhere up in here a little bit with your heart rate. If you decided you wanted to go at something that's a little bit challenging, there comes a point where your breathing gets challenged, and that is known as the lactate threshold. So that's this kind of like line and little box around it. That is a heart rate where you're using less and less fat. And essentially, once you get to and more carbohydrates, so again, glucose and muscle glycogen, then when you get to that point, that level of intensity and whatever it is you're choosing to do, that there you can no longer support your activity with fat and oxygen, because you need oxygen to break down the fat. So for example, sprinters, when they're way up in here, they don't breathe. Your 100-meter dash people, almost none of them in the Olympics breathe. They have their breath, they go, 10 seconds later they're done. They didn't take a single breath. It was of no value to them because they're using the cash in the wallet, ATP. They don't have time for oxygen to break down fat, right? Now, in that area right here, this zone 2 where you're by your lactate threshold, what's also happening is because you can't use the oxygen and because you're having to use carbohydrates, you get waste products. That's lactic acid, and that's those hydrogen ions which are changing your blood pH. That's why sometimes like your vision might get narrowed or you might get nauseous. That is the zone that is really, really challenging to deal with. Hockey lines often deal right around there. High-level rowers doing 10,000, 20,000 meters, right around there. You will find certain positions on a soccer field sometimes right around there for a little bit. Like a defender maybe has to go up and like actually try and score and has to get back. They might have spent 45, 50 seconds in this area. Basketball occasionally, although basketball more frequently goes between here and here these days. But it depends. I mean, it's a run and gun show. You might be in here. And lots of other sports will be somewhere in this spectrum. You can kind of tell based upon how many breaks you need to take for that sport. Okay,